Between 1975 and 1979, this former school became a torture prison for the Khmer Rouge. Up to 20,000 people were brought here and only 12 survived. These people often didn't know why they'd been brought here. In 1979, when the Khmer Rouge was overthrown, this prison was discovered. All the records had been destroyed and all the staff had fled, leaving behind 14 bodies. It was impossible to identify the bodies due to the excessive amount of torture that had left its mark. Now these white graves here are a memorial to the last 14 people killed in the S21 prison. This is Block A, and these all used to be classrooms, and as you can see on the second floor and again on the third floor, you have the ventilation. On the first floor where people were tortured, the ventilation was bricked in. Prisoners who could be here for weeks, sometimes months, would be tortured 3 times a day. This is one of the many torture rooms, and this is the bed and the shackles that the prisoners would be on. And over here we have a photo of one of the 14 prisoners that were discovered. The prisoners were killed just before the prison officers left, and because they didn't want the gunshot to be heard, they were bludgeoned to death with knives. This is one of the tables where the prisoners would face interrogation. Here we have the rules of the prison, the discipline of the security. You must answer accordingly to my question. Don't turn them away. Don't be fooled, for you are a chap who dare to thwart the revolution. You must immediately answer my question without wasting time to reflect. And this one is incredible. Number 6. While getting lashes or electrification, you must not cry at all. This is what's known as the gallows, which actually was here when it was a school. It used to be a climbing frame, and then it was used as torture purposes. You can see the hooks at the top. The prisoner would be hoisted up with his wrists tied behind his back. Once the prisoner passed out, he would then be dropped to the floor, where he would be dipped headfirst into one of these, which would be filled with human excrement. Once the prisoner regained consciousness, the whole torture would start again. S21 was just one of up to 200 prisons across Cambodia. It's a really beautiful courtyard. In April 1975, they were met with greetings. People were happy. The Cambodians had been suffering years of American bombing. Within 3 hours, all the inhabitants of Phnom Penh had been told they had to leave. Initially, they were told they had to leave because the Americans were going to start bombing and that they could return in 3 days. This was a lie. All the people from Phnom Penh and other major cities moved out into the fields. This was year 0, the birth of the new Cambodia. During the 3 years of Khmer Rouge rule in Cambodia, 1 in 4 Cambodians were murdered. These are the single cells. Used to be a classroom, and you can see how it's hastily being converted. Most prisoners would be kept in mass detention cells, which we'll see in a short while. But when they were being interrogated and tortured, they would be brought into single cells, such as these. This barbed wire was placed on the top 2 floors after a prisoner had jumped from the top floor, committed suicide. just can't comprehend what it must have been like to have been brought here and having absolutely no idea why, not knowing what your crime was, and being tortured 3 times a day to write a confession. This is one of the mass detention cells. This would hold up to about 60 people at a time. This building would have been filled with the sounds of children learning, playing, and it was also filled with the sounds of people having to endure the most awful torture, treatment, punishment. Cambodians killing Cambodians. Shows you some of the torture devices that were used here. So you have the waterboarding, the bath where prisoners would be dropped into head first. I think the one that really gets to you is the box where they would keep insects, and it shows you the prisoner, the female prisoner, having her breasts, her nipples cut off with pliers, and then insects placed inside the wounds. I've cycled away from the centre of Phnom Penh to a place called Choang Ek, which is more commonly known as the killing fields. When the prisons became too full and the Khmer Rouge had no way of disposing of bodies, they started setting up killing centres. 20,000 people were murdered on this site, and there were hundreds of places just like this. Up to 3 million Cambodians were killed in the 4 years that the Khmer Rouge had power. Just here is the site of where the trucks used to stop when they bring prisoners from the Tuol Sleng prison. Around 2 to 3 trucks a month used to arrive, holding up to 30 prisoners who would be blindfolded, terrified. They were told they were moving to a new house where they would work, receive better treatment. They were lied to. They were brought here to be killed. In 1978, the trucks would arrive daily, bringing hundreds of people each day to this site to be murdered. Just a few metres away from the truck stop was a dark and gloomy detention centre. In 1976 and 1977, prisoners were killed immediately. In 1978, there were too many. They couldn't kill them all on the same day, so this wooden centre was built. People would have to stay in there overnight and be executed the next day. Lawyers, doctors, teachers, politicians, people who wore glasses, people who knew a second language, people with soft hands, were all considered to be traitors, the enemy. The majority of people that were sent here and killed were completely innocent. Wow. These were used to actually slit the throats of the prisoners. It's just like a saw. The Khmer Rouge didn't use guns to kill the prisoners because of the noise and the cost, so they just slit their throats using these. And this is the site of a chemical substance storage room. It used to store DDT, which was spread over the bodies of the victims after they were placed in pits. This would eliminate the stench of the decaying flesh, but also would kill any prisoners that were still alive. We're now in the actual killing fields. This is where the mass graves were found, 129 mass graves, and the biggest ones have now got these roofs on. This one here, they found 450 bodies. You can quite clearly see here where the mass graves were. Over time, the land has shifted, and when it rains and the soil moves, it reveals more bones, pieces of clothing still being found. If you look close enough, you can still actually see little fragments of bone. Under Pol Pot's rule, no one was allowed to own possessions or property or farms, so all the farms in the region became property of the state. Pol Pot demanded that rice production was trebled overnight. This was an impossible demand. People from the city were sent to these collective farms to work, had no idea how to produce rice. They suddenly became the poorest of the poor. Money, possessions, wealth suddenly didn't mean anything anymore. They would arrive on these collective farms and have to work for 12 hours or more without a break, and being fed just a couple of bottles of rice soup. Thousands of people couldn't keep up and died. Pol Pot became increasingly paranoid, and just a few words about someone being a traitor or not following the rules of the Khmer Rouge would lead to imprisonment, which would often lead to death. And here we have 166 Khmer Rouge members that had been thought to have been traitors. A lot of these victims were thought to be collaborating with the Vietnamese on the Eastern Front, and the reason why they were beheaded is because it was considered that they had a Cambodian body but a Vietnamese head. This is the remaining clothes of the victims after the site was excavated in 1980. There's children's clothes in there, and every 2 to 3 months the workers at this site go around this killing field picking up more bits of bone, more bits of rag. Following the fall of the Khmer Rouge in 1980, the Khmer Rouge went to the jungle on the border with Thailand to regroup. Incredibly, whilst Cambodia was trying to rebuild its country, the Khmer Rouge was still seen by Western powers as the leaders of this country, by the UK, by the US. The Khmer Rouge were even invited to UN meetings. Pol Pot himself lived a good life. He was only placed under house arrest 1 year before he died at 73. He got to see his grandchildren grow up. Some of Pol Pot's victims didn't reach the age of 2. This next stop is probably the toughest one on the tour so far. This is the killing tree against which the executioners would beat children. When it was discovered, there was blood and brain. The executioners would just basically pick up the children by their feet and bash their heads in against the tree. The women and children who were buried in this mass grave, numbering over 100. The reason why the Khmer Rouge killed children was because they didn't want people growing up wanting to avenge the atrocities that happened in places like this. There's an old saying that the Khmer Rouge used to use about, if you want to kill a plant, you also have to kill its roots. The tour of the killing fields ends with the Stupa Memorial that's right at the centre of the killing fields. Now I was a bit unsure about whether to film in here, but on the audio guide it does tell you to take photos and to share them. They want people to understand what happened here, so here we go. Each one of these skulls has a coloured spot which shows how the victim died. It's not been the easiest of days, to be honest. Both sites are very tough once you see just what happened to the people here. A quarter of all Cambodians were killed by the Khmer Rouge, and it's still recent, the late 1970s, so there are a lot of people still alive who lost many members of their family and friends. It's just unbelievable to think that this could happen. If you do come to Phnom Penh, then I highly recommend you go and visit both of these places. I think it's important when you're a traveller to learn about a country's history, especially a dark history like this. Now, I'm going to cycle back to Phnom Penh. It's about 40 minutes on my bike. I think I deserve a couple of beers after that.